Welcome to the video presentation of Enemy Within, long-term motivation effects of deep player behavior models for dynamic difficulty adjustment. This paper was published in the 2020 CHI Conference on Human Factors in Computing Systems and is accessible via the link in the video description. In this work, we approach a novel take on dynamic difficulty adjustment in video games. Instead of dynamically adjusting in-game parameters, as it is the case with most existing approaches, we adjust the behavioral patterns of NPC opponents to approximate the original player's performance. Within the field study of 4 weeks, taking place in the MMORPG Ion, players continuously trained their own nemesis by challenging themselves up to once daily. During this development, the personal arch-enemy reflected the player's strengths, weaknesses, and demanded constant adaptation. In contrast to traditional parameter tuning DDA, players reported significantly higher scores of intrinsic motivation when facing these novel adaptive enemies. Above that, in-game activity logs indicate that players prefer this kind of challenge over static, non-adaptive encounters over the long term. Consistently balanced challenges that keep players motivated over the long term are becoming hard to attain, especially with large player communities encompassing broad ranges of proficiency. Dynamic difficulty adjustment, DDA, denotes a principle that adapts video game challenges to individual players' abilities. It has been successfully deployed in scientific and industrial context and is usually accomplished by continuous tuning of in-game parameters. For example, this could be the hit ratio or damage in a first-person shooter or the speed or position in a racing game. However, these systems are limited to a small number of high-level parameters, require careful tuning, and have to be hidden to avoid exploitation. On the other hand, a common paradigm found in a plethora of games is the encounter of challenging yourself, or at least an evil version of yourself. Popular examples would be the Dark Link from the Legend of Zelda series, Renegade Shepard from Mass Effect 3, the Doppelganger from Guild Wars, the Doppelganger from Guild Wars 2, SAX, Replica Riku, mirror opponents, divine embodiments, and so on and so forth. Yet, so far, these have only been realized as crude approximations of the original player, as they mimic appearance, equipment, basic moves and/or skill sets, but rely on heuristic, strategically rigid decision-making. This work brings both worlds of DDA and challenging yourself together by creating a personalized nemesis that continually learns from the individual player's behavior. This mechanism is enabled by deep player behavior modeling, a technique that models and generates preference distributions for in-game actions by recording them together with the contextual game state. Before I go into technical details, I will first outline the game and evaluation environment. To get an ecologically valid estimate of whether this kind of encounter could in fact establish a continuously motivating challenge, the best testing ground would be a popular game with an existing player base that covers a wide range of proficiencies, from beginner level to expert performance. Thus, we contacted a private server of the AAA MMORPG Ion to host our study. As with a classic MMORPG, battles are executed by activating sequences of action skills that have situational usage. The more optimal this skill rotation is and the better and faster players can adapt to difficult situations, the more likely it is for players to win a battle. To investigate the difference of traditional parameter tuning DDA and our approach, we implemented the adaptive single-player instance dungeon Eternal Challenge for daily entries. This adaptive dungeon consisted of both traditional DDA opponents that employed parameter tuning and our novel DPBM approach. To further contrast different dimensions of parameters, various opponents were designed with distinct outer appearance. After all, we dynamically adjusted the frequency with which the enemies appeared, the perseverance or maximal HP, and the disturbance or the amount of weakening actions that the opponents used. The better the player got in overcoming these challenges, the harder they became for the next run, and vice versa. For the DPBM opponent, only the behavioral patterns changed in that they constantly approximated the original player's strategy. To keep the encounter as novel as possible, no information about DPBM or the opponent's decision-making was presented during the study. So how does this DPBM work? As mentioned earlier, in-game battles consist mainly of the activation of different skill actions in different situations. To get a good impression about how decision-making happens throughout different players, we conducted an initial expert interview. From this, we extracted that players' action selection is mainly influenced by their preferred skill rotation, that is, the personal sequence in which they would like to execute these, and responsive decisions, in that they have to react to, for example, low HP with heals, debuffs with cleanses, or the like. Thus, the DPBM architecture looks as following. A huge input vector is constructed that contains current game state information about the player, his target, and the skill history. This is then mapped to the executed skill in this situation via machine learning, in this case a multi-layer perceptron. Given that enough data is present, this model produces skill preference distributions in similar situations that have already been observed. For more details, please refer to our paper. Once the adaptive dungeon was implemented, the evaluation period followed. To prevent that novelty biases would distort our results, we observed the dungeon entries compared to alternative dungeons over 4 weeks. Furthermore, we concealed the appearance of a scientific study until after this period, when the questionnaire was presented, to diminish experimenter bias effects and keep it as ecologically valid as possible. During this study period, 171 different players entered the dungeon, resulting in 776 total instance runs. Unsurprisingly, the new instance dungeon Eternal Challenge started with a distinct peak just after the release, which is attributable to the novelty factor. Still, even after omitting the first week, it managed to attract significantly more players than any other dungeon. The fact that this dungeon's rewards are similar to other dungeons, and there was nothing that you couldn't get anywhere else, consolidates the assumption that people ran it because they felt intrinsically motivated. But this intrinsic motivation might stem from the traditional DDA opponents or the novel DPBM encounter. To assess this, the post-study questionnaire included intrinsic motivation inventory items as well as qualitative statements. With regards to IMI, participants reported distinct absolute values for DPBM that were even significantly higher within interest enjoyment, tension pressure, and effort importance compared to all or most of the traditional DDA opponents. This indicates that facing your personalized nemesis fueled by deep player behavior modeling can be a thrilling, challenging, and intrinsically motivating experience. Qualitative insights even confirm the increasing challenge with statements like, "Quite easy at first, but afterwards I was really busy thinking about how I approach him," or "It's almost as good as I am." Despite the fact that it was never mentioned that this opponent would somehow model player behavior, people quickly interpreted its decision-making as replicating their own, as they reported that, "At first he randomly used skills that I also used, later he added my combos," or "It tried to replicate my own skills and techniques." Altogether, participants rated this opponent as a novel and motivating experience, or in other words, "It was hilarious when I played against myself." This successful representation could only be ensured because of the approximation of individual atomic decision-making. DPBMs were able to correctly predict play actions with over 60% accuracy on average, while training time took only about 2 seconds on the game server. Eventually, we measured a substantially and consistent motivation achieved with the support of DPBM over longer term. Above that, the measured intrinsic motivation of challenging a DPBM-fueled opponent even significantly exceeded traditional DDA. Additionally, players perceive behavior from DPBM as representative of their own decision-making. Thus, we conclude that DPBM is a viable, effective, and efficient technique of establishing adaptive challenges. This evaluation is based on preceding work on using DPBM for DDA. Apart from this application area, similar successes and accurate player representations could already be examined for substituting disconnected players in online matches or augmenting game balancing by incorporating behavior models of the whole player population. Check the video description for related work on DPBM. Thank you very much for your attention. If you have any questions, remarks, ideas or collaboration proposals, don't hesitate to contact me using the provided mail address.